Good afternoon, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm John Quincy, the chair, joined by Councilmember Yang, Council Vice President Glidden, Councilmember Bender, and Andrew Johnson. We have a couple of discussion items today, but on the consent items, just read through them really quickly here, and if anybody would like to pull any off for any further discussion or have any questions, we'll get to those. The items are, the first four are from the City Attorney's Office. They are a series of settlement conferences, compensation, workers' comp claims, and personal injury settlement. Also from the City Clerk's Office, we have the contract with DataNet Systems Corporation for the Legislative Information Management System. City Coordinator brings forward two items. They're a grant, acceptance of a grant from National Endowment for the Arts for the Creative City Making Minneapolis project. We also have a contract with the Minnesota Department of Commerce for weatherization data conversion to public summary data. The Convention Center has four items. These are all contract amendments and related to closeouts. Several contracts during construction at the upgrades to the Convention Center over the year. The Finance Department brings forward the tax-exempt term loans for U.S. Bank for the Nicollet Mall project, as well as the acceptance of gifts for the construction of the Downtown East Commons item. Item number 14, 15, and 16 are from the Information Technology Department. It's a contract with amendment with Ginfinet software. Contract amendment with Kells Innovation for the Mozart data collection system, and the contract amendment with N. Harris for the utility billing system. Community Development and Regulatory Services Committee brings forward the 2015 levy for special assessments and adoption of those assessment rolls, as well as authorizing the Director of Hennepin County Tax Department to place those assessments against certain properties. From the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee, we have the Prevention and Management of Hypertension and Prediabetes agreement with several clinics. The Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee brings forward the Police Mounted Patrol Boarding Services contract, the Downtown Improvement District contract amendment for increased summer police enforcement, and a DWI Enforcement Officer Grant Award from the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. The Transportation and Public Works Committee brings forward the Northern Tributary to 35W North Tunnel Modeling Project, a North Region Watershed Modeling Project, the Nicollet Mall Public Art Agreement amendments, a bid for liquid carbon dioxide, the bid for Columbia Heights Mixing Chambers Hallway Painting Project, and the bid for automated meter reading equipment. Any questions on those 27 items or any further clarification? I'd like to move all those 27 items as the consent agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed, and those items are brought forward. Now we get to go to our two discussion items. The first one is going to be the reopening of Nicollet and Lake project, and the second will be the impound lot improvement project. So I think we're going to be taking up the Nicollet and Lake project first, and I understand Mr. Frank will be leading us through this. This is action that was previously taken at the CDRS committee, and so this committee's action is to look at it from the financial terms, and I'm assuming, Mr. Frank, that's what your presentation will be about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and committee members, good afternoon. I will just touch quickly on some of the highlight level facts on the real estate, Mr. Chair, and then focus on the financial components. As you all know, the City of Minneapolis has a long-held vision for the Lake and Nicollet area that includes reopening Nicollet Avenue across Lake Street and the Midtown Greenway and redeveloping the property on both sides of the reopened Nicollet Avenue. There is strong policy support and support from the community for this effort, and the image on screen from the 2005 Midtown Minneapolis plan shows one potential development scenario. In April 2014, just one quick bit of history, the City Council approved the Lake and Nicollet redevelopment plan, which designated.
Excuse me, Mr.
Sorry,
Frank, I'm
am I supposed to
just
press?
a little confused as well. We need to flip over to the opaque projector rather than the screen, at least on our monitor. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for the tip. The image now on your screen is from the 2005 Midtown Minneapolis plan, and it shows one potential development scenario. In April of 2014, the City Council approved the Lake and Nicollet redevelopment plan, which designated the area as blighted and named both 30 West Lake Street and 10 West Lake Street, the two properties I'm here today to talk to you about, as parcels the city may acquire. The 30 West Lake Street parcel, now on screen on the left in this aerial photo, which is also known as the grocery store site, is 2.9 acres with a vacant 26,000 square foot retail building constructed in 1977 and most recently occupied by a SuperValue grocery store. In September of this year, the owner agreed to sell this property to the city for $5,275,000. The city will receive monthly rent of $7,500 from SuperValue under the lease for the grocery store, and the tenant is also responsible for maintaining the site. The 10 West Lake Street parcel on the right in the aerial photo, also known as the Kmart site, is 7.1 acres with an occupied 100,000 square foot retail building, also constructed in 1977 and currently in use as a Kmart store. The city and the owner of that property have discussed him providing the city or its assigns with a 1 to 2 year option at a cost of $800,000 for that option to purchase the leased fee estate for $8 million. Now here comes the financial part. Staff is requesting the appropriation of up to $6,275,000 from the development account for both the 30 West Lake Street purchase and the 10 West Lake Street option price, as well as associated due diligence and closing costs from the available fund balance from the development account as a temporary source until the City Council approves a modification to the common project and redevelopment plan, at which time tax increment from the common project will reimburse the development account fund. Quick word on what's available in each of those. As of November 2015, right now, there's approximately $10 million in uncommitted funds in the development account available for the temporary usage. I should point out that approximately $4.9 million is recommended in the mayor's proposed 2016 budget. So you can see by that math, that's why we're suggesting that there will be a subsequent reallocation, reappropriation. By the end of the year, there'll be approximately $15 million in uncommitted common project funds, which are available for eligible uses. Just a quick word on next steps and then any questions. So after council approval, next steps for the grocery store site would include closing on the property in early December. And next steps for the Kmart site include continued negotiations on the option agreement, review of due diligence information, paying the $800,000 option payment if this information is acceptable, and continued discussions with key stakeholders, especially Kmart. Thank you, and I'm available for any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frank. I'm sure we'll have a few questions on this. I just wanted to review. This had come through CDRS previously, and that was really talking about it from a development perspective. This finance piece is, do we have funds available? And can we refill those funds from other purposes? So there's a big ticket, and that's why we're having a discussion today. Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wanted to hear, I think this might be a question more for Ms. Christensen, but I wanted to hear just maybe a bigger explanation from you about what is the common project and how much money does it produce? You know, talk a little bit about those pieces and how does, you know, the $15 million, what was, when, how long has it taken to accumulate that, or some of those things. I just want to, I think it would be good for us to understand that as it's going to be a replenishing source, or it's identified as a replenishing source.
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, I may need to defer to one of my staff, Mark Winkelhake, but let me see if I can answer at least a portion of your question. The Common Project TIF district is created from special legislation that allowed us to combine a number of pre-1979 TIF districts. And again, I'm looking to Mark for the nod or the shake of his head. That allowed us to utilize those resources to pull together for uses that fell within the geographic area of the Common Project. The resource that is alluded to in this particular request for council action is from a source called the Common Project Reserve, which actually is a finite pool of funding. This particular source of funds is not a replenishing source. This would be a drawdown of the existing balance within that fund.
And say again, when will the fund today has $15 million?
That's correct. The balance that's uncommitted, there are other obligations that are currently associated with that fund from a long-term financing perspective. Portions of that fund are used for Target Center outstanding debt and some other obligations. So of those funds that are not currently committed or obligated for other purposes, leaves a balance of 15 to then be available for this particular project. And with the currently proposed drawdown would leave a balance of slightly less than $10 million.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So we're really evaluating, this is a one-time funding source. And because it is finite, that's the issue and risk associated with using one-time money is we wouldn't be available to use in ongoing support. But when would the TIF area that you described, the Common Bond Fund, or is that the correct Common Project? Thank you. When is that due to expire, and what kind of timing do we have on that legislation?
Chair Quincy, if I can beg the indulgence of Mr. Winkelhake, I'll ask him to please respond to that question.
Mr. Winkelhagen?
Yep, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. The Common Project is, as Ms. Christensen described, is a geographic area of the city, and it is made up actually of a number of TIF districts, or at least there were a number of TIF districts in it, the last of which expires and will terminate this year.
Okay.
So thereafter, all the generators of revenue, the tax increment districts, will be gone. There is a certain amount of money left over, of which 15 million is the uncommitted portion. The rest is all committed to Target Center debt service.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that really does kind of point to some of the issues that we've been talking about internally. Is we really need to assess what is the current balance of that and its applications that we'll be looking for it as a funding source in the future. So we really need to do a deeper dive and inventory of that. And I think we'll be looking forward to some sort of recommended language either this week or in the next cycle that we might be able to explore that in a more robust way, either whether it's at committee of the whole or as a separate pull-out presentation for this committee. We have Councilmember Yang. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to direct the question to Mr. Frank. I guess the big elephant in the room is Kmart. What happens with Kmart? And they have a long lease. So I'm doing the math right now, and about $13 million and some change is going to be towards buying the whole thing. But what do we do with Kmart?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, among the reasons that staff is recommending this kind of structure, and we did spend a little bit of time on this at CDRS Committee 2, is that we do not yet have a deal with Kmart. And so the reason that we're recommending an option for what we're calling the Kmart parcel in this report is to give ourselves some time to try to come to agreement with them. So far, they have said they're interested in staying on site. They're very willing to listen to a proposal for how accommodating a store for them might work on site. They've repeatedly said they're willing to listen. We don't know yet how successful we'll be in that negotiation, and that's why we're suggesting setting this up as an option where we would put some money up that would be non-refundable, but we would have a chance to take those variables off the table and see if we can come to terms with Kmart and be standing in front of you again to recommend purchasing the property and striking a deal with Kmart. But we don't know yet, is the short version of that long answer.
Okay, and Mr. Frank, I mean, with regards to the 30 West Lake side, I mean, we're going to buy that outright, right? And so we're going to buy that outright. 10 West Lake, we're going to put an option on it. I think it's about 10%, right? Roughly about $800,000, you said?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, that's correct.
And that buys us about a year, you said?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, we're still negotiating the
Okay.
option agreement, so somewhere between 1 and 2 years, correct?
Okay. And, you know, in terms of the redevelopment plan, I mean, can you just, you know, give us the very, very, very short version of what redevelopment is supposed to look like, and, you know, what sorts of revenue we can see from that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, a few things in response to that. So the image that I showed a few minutes ago is from the City Council adopted policy for the area that talks about what might development look like here in the future. The key feature of it is a reopened Nicollet. The reason that we're pursuing this, the number one reason that we're pursuing this, is to reestablish the street grid here. Development would be great. We love growing the tax base, the right kind of development. That's the business we're in. But the number one thing is to reestablish the street grid and put Nicollet back where it belongs. The redevelopment plan that I referenced here that Council adopted in April of 2014 is specific about actions that the city could take, specifically that we might acquire these two properties. That was a primary driver of undertaking that effort. It wasn't a land use plan. It didn't say, if we got our hands on these pieces of property, would it be retail with housing? It didn't go there. It was much more about what specific financing and legal and acquisition activities might the city undertake. Okay, there was a third part to your question, and I apologize.
No, and Mr. Chair, one last question, if I may. You know, Mr. Frank, I don't know if you're the right person for this, but in terms of reopening Nicollet, do we have an idea or a ballpark figure as to, you know, how much that's going to cost to reopen it in terms of the public works piece of things?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Yang, we, I believe, are undertaking to put the capital project to construct the street once and if and when the land is available into our capital budget. So I can't, as I stand here, say how much we think that might cost. And in any event, we're treating the two pieces, the land part, which is a lot of what we're doing here, and the capital construction part separately.
It'll be a pretty major undertaking, though.
If you
Should
can't
that
tell,
come to pass.
Mr. Chair, this is a major undertaking.
Yes. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if there are other questions, but I'd like to move approval of this item and make some comments.
Sure, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, this mistake that the city made was made before actually several members of this committee were born, I think. So we've inherited this disjuncture in our community, this blockage of a really important corridor that runs from the very southern tip of the city up through downtown, connecting to the river. And, you know, the reason that we're looking at this area, I'm sure you all know, is because of the roadway. So there are many, many single-story buildings surrounded by surface parking lots in the city of Minneapolis. The reason that these are so important to us is because they're critical for us to reopen this connection. This is a really important transportation connection. It is on the Nicollet Avenue transit spine, which is one of the most heavily used bus routes in the state of Minnesota, with the 17 and 18 routes carrying 6 million riders a year. And those buses currently have to detour around this large 10-acre site on their way. This is also a very, and increasingly so, transit-rich part of the city, where walking is very difficult because of this disruption in the street grid and the urban fabric here. This is kind of a no person's land in the middle of what is otherwise a relatively dense and walkable and transit-oriented part of the city. And so as we've gotten into the details of these really complex negotiations, I really want to thank our staff who have, after years of work, brought 4 different private parties to the table. It's put us at what is probably the best position we will be in. and anytime soon to acquire the properties needed and reconnect the roadway here. We are certainly taking on a stepwise process where there's still a lot of uncertainty here in the near future as we negotiate with the fourth and final private entity, the Kmart lease. And I think we're all hopeful that that will go as quickly as possible, but we know it may be a long time before that is resolved. Or we may never have a deal here that that is palatable for the city to take on. But again, I think this is our kind of critical decision point here in the near future, 10 years or 20 years, where we're in the best position we will likely be in to correct this past mistake. So I think the way that this has been structured gives the city a lot of good checkpoints within these next several steps where we're able to review all the details and negotiate these final details before committing the $800,000. And then we have this period of time where we'll be able to sit down with Kmart and have eliminated all of those other variables and see if we can come to terms that will work for both parties. So thanks again to staff. And, we've been meeting monthly about this since I took office. Councilmember Lilligren, Council Vice President have been involved for many years. So it's a really exciting time.
Thank you. Councilmember Glidden, go ahead.
Thanks. I'll just be brief. I agree this is probably the best opportunity that we have had ever to date to work on negotiating a way that we are able to reopen Nicollet in a way that allows more appropriate development to happen on this very, very large site. That being said, I've been trying to really temper my happiness that we are at this moment with, frankly, the reality that however closer we are, we still have a pretty big hurdle ahead of us, that hurdle being a 53 or 37 years going to 53 lease that Kmart has with the option within it to sublease that property. So I think that Mr. Frank is right. Establishing some better parameters for negotiation will be helpful. I think also we'll be able to see what Kmart's true intentions are through this process, but the public purse is not unlimited. And that's something that I have been sharing with my constituents who know that I've been really committed to this work and this opportunity for many, many years. Thanks for allowing us to get to this step. I think it's, in my opinion, this is the right choice for us to take this step and explore this very critical opportunity, and we will see where the negotiations take us.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is obviously a bad mistake to have closed down Nicollet Avenue in the first place. And actually, I'm one of those that was born after the decision was made, so certainly inherited it. I think this is long overdue, though. I'm excited about the prospects here. I would strongly encourage Kmart to work as hard as they can to get us to a point of reopening Nicollet Avenue. I would hope that we look at every single option in our toolbox for reopening this street, every legal option, every possibility that we have to get this done, because it does have a huge cost right now for everybody from transit users just to lost economic potential in our city. So thanks to our staff and all those council members and other leaders here and before us that brought us to this point.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague, Councilmember Johnson, talked about how he wasn't born. I wasn't born then either, I think. And my goodness, I hate to say this as somebody who lives on the opposite side of town, but you know, Council Vice President Clinton pointed this out, that the public purse isn't unlimited. And in a situation like this, I, I wish in some ways, we could just think about, options on both properties first before we spent, on one of them, and then on the other, I mean, hope that, we get to a point where we can, get an agreement, because the 37-year lease is, the really huge gorilla in the room. And if we don't get to any place, I mean, I'd hate to lose that 10% or that $800,000 in that situation. And, I mean, if this is what we call a mistake, I mean, it's a pretty expensive mistake. And, I mean, part of me hates this idea of calling these things mistakes, because what that means is that sometimes we're going to be a lot more conservative in the future in taking big actions or big risks. And to me, I mean, I think sometimes it's a role of government to make mistakes, and sometimes make even big mistakes, just so that we can learn from it, but so that we can get the ball rolling on a lot of things that need to happen in our city. And where I live on the north side, I mean, sometimes I'd like us to be a little bit more liberal in terms of how we do things, because if we're too conservative, things don't get done on the north side. And so while I support this idea of correcting a mistake, I just think that we should be very cautious in terms of how we spend public dollars, in a situation like this, where I would say that, I used to live pretty close to this area, that, folks have corrected themselves, and, folks have learned how to live with this big mistake for a long time. I mean, if the opportunity is right, I mean, we should take advantage of it. But a situation where, we can't get anywhere with Kmart, I mean, I think we should just, think about reconsidering, and maybe that's down the line. Hopefully we get a longer option so that we can, have that time to negotiate. But goodness, this is a tough decision for me. But I will do what I can to support the council members who are in this area, just because I think that, it's the right thing to do. But, for the future, I mean, at least, with my selfish interests in mind, I mean, I'd like us to, take a lot more risk in terms of doing things in other parts of the town, just because we need to learn from mistakes. One, not to make it, but also to, really still be bold in terms of doing things and getting things rolling, because we need that as a city. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Not seeing any further discussion on this, on Councilmember Bender's motion. All those in approval, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Frank, for your time and attention to this matter, as well as all of the staff who's been associated with this for so long. Brings us to our next discussion item. And Mr. Warchus, I don't think it's nearly as exciting as a Kmart Nicollet site, but it's pretty exciting for us all. So it's a big deal. And that's why it's on this agenda, because of the costs associated with it. But we also wanted to provide some good news and see what we can do when we do some of this advanced planning and thinking.
Good afternoon, Chair Quincy and council members. John Warchus, Director of Traffic and Parking Services with Public Works Department. This item has been before Transportation Public Works Committee, and so today I'm going to provide us a short abbreviated version of that presentation effectively. First of all, we're seeking two authorizations today. The first is to approve the concept plan, which I will talk to in a few moments. As the preferred approach through much discussion over numerous years, which effectively reduces the impound lot and shifts it easterly on the site. The second authorization today is to allow staff to proceed with project implementation, not only for modifying or improving and reducing the impound lot, but also improving the building itself. To give everyone an understanding of the impound lot and where we're headed with this action, here is the concept plan that we're seeking approval for. The kind of pink or salmon colored shaded triangle is the impound lot operations that we're planning to shrink into and move easterly on the site. The yellow area is the overflow needs that remain on the westerly side of Van Wyck Boulevard. And then the blue area on the map indicates where we're relocating the police holds to. To give everyone a high-level look at what the concept plan and its major elements include relative to improvements and implementation, we need to do building improvements. We need better and improved customer waiting space. We need to add restrooms to the site. We also need more employee space and improved employee space. As I mentioned on the concept, we're moving the police holds over from the main lot over underneath the I-394 bridges. Likewise, we're reducing our footprint by taking our auction efforts and taking them off-site. We also need to do lot improvements. Specifically, we want to reduce the lot by approximately 40%. We want to shift it all easterly, but we also need to do upgrades on those lot surfaces as well. And then lastly, we have security and fencing. All of those systems will be upgraded and be brand new for the site. In moving towards the schedule and funding components of this, we have laid out our efforts here on this table. Over the next several years, we intend to move forward with this. Preliminary design being accomplished in 15 and 16, final design in 16, and hopefully our construction in 17. We have identified an approximate $7 million budget for that. We have funding to date in our operating budget to do the preliminary design work, both in this year and in next year. And we are in the midst of putting together a financial plan and a capital budget request, which we intend to submit next year as part of the budget process moving forward for this project. So with that, Mr. Chair and council members, I'll stand for any questions that you have today.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Warchus? Not seeing any, but I'll offer a few and maybe some thought provokers. Oh, we have Councilmember Yang that's clicked in. You're in. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was gonna make a motion to move this forward for approval and add some comments if that
Go ahead.
is okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Warchus, for presenting here. I gave a big, long, I guess, speech at TPW, and so I'll shorten this to just kind of focus on the building improvements. You know, for myself, at least, you know, this has been, you know, an eye-opening experience, just, you know, engaging with the communities, you know, whether they were from Bryn Mawr or whether they were from the Harrison neighborhood in general. And, you know, Mr. Warchus and his staff did a really great job of engagement and, you know, talking through this whole thing from just, you know, the initial meetings where they just kind of, you know, we all got shouted out of the room, you know, where nobody wanted any options on the table. Nobody wanted to be a part of the conversation to, you know, a better place, I think. And, you know, in this situation, for myself, you know, I really think that the building improvements need to be such that we have a building that makes everyone comfortable, be it our employees or be it the general public who show up there. I mean, just to see stuff like, you know, add customer waiting space assumes that, you know, we didn't have much. Add customer restrooms, goodness, we didn't have any. Employee space and all that stuff. And I mean, those things are things that in some ways, I mean, we should do better as a city because those things don't represent us. We should make it comfortable for anybody and everybody who shows up. In my younger years, there was a winter season where I was towed about 4 times in a winter, and that was terrible. And I hated to be there. So, I mean, I couldn't imagine every year, everybody, you know, showing up there and just having to deal with that and hating to be there. And, you know, in situations like that where most people show up under not so good circumstances, I mean, I think we have to show, you know, our best feet or, you know, our best. And so, you know, I'd like to see that happen, you know, on top of just this shrinkage. I think this shrinkage is good in the long run. You know, talk about this idea of, you know, at some point there was this supposed promise that we would eliminate the impound lot and put it somewhere else. Well, CPED, Public Works, they looked really hard to find a different space and a different place for it, and we couldn't do that. And so this is what we're left with. And, it's as I say it, I mean, the best compromise that we could get under the circumstances. And, for that, I mean, we have opened up 11.2 acres or so for development. And I think, I mean, that part of it is exciting. I mean, that we can develop there on top of this shrinkage that is or will happen soon. And so, this is a good compromise for us as a city. And I want to thank you, John and Ellen and other folks for just, working really hard to get us to this point. Beth Grossen from CPED as well and other folks there. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Also want to just take the opportunity, since this is something that the council had taken a previous action on back in 2013 towards the end of that year. So this is an implementation of that strategy, and it's been very thoughtful, very process-driven, and looking for solutions. This particular layout that you're talking about now provides greater efficiencies for the use of the land for certain, and then is a good investment for our public benefit. So that's what we're supposed to be doing. So thank you for that from our folks who are at the impound lot, as well as property services and transportation public works. So I think taking up on Councilmember Yang's motion to approve, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And that is approved. So thank you very much. Ms. Giesler, are there any other items, or are we concluded with our agenda? So we are adjourned. Thank you.